welcome everyone to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Thank you for tuning in wherever and however you are tuning in today. We appreciate you and we hope you'll like, subscribe, and share this with your friends and colleagues. My name is Caleb Talley. I am a Startup Junkie and I'm joined by my co-host, Startup Junkie founder, Jeff Amerine. How's it going, Jeff?
Oh, it's going great. Glad to be here. And I know we're going to have another great episode.
Absolutely. We're excited to be joined today by Stacy Taniguchi. He's a professor at BYU and he's a senior consultant and managing partner at Beta Experiences, which is an exciting and really innovating experience venture that's backed by psychology. And we'll get into all of that here soon. But Stacy, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So Stacy, we usually start these by kind of getting the origin story. You know, tell us a little bit about Stacy and how you got to where you are. Start from, you don't have to go all the way back to Genesis, but you can, just give us an idea.
Well, I appreciate your aloha shirt that you're wearing today. So I I was born and raised in Hawaii on the island of Molokai, which probably most of your audience either hasn't been to or may not even have heard, but it's one of the 8 islands of the Hawaiian chain. Was born and raised there, but my family was involved with the military. And so we did a lot of traveling around after I was at the age of 7. So we've lived in Japan, we've been in central United States in the state of Illinois, which is just north of you guys, Southern California, Washington. But eventually I ended up going to Alaska and found out that that's where my heart was really at. And I ended up living there for 25 years, was a school teacher there, and also ended up being a professional guide because, as all teachers know, there's 3 reasons why you become a school teacher, and that's June, July, and August. But yeah, but unfortunately, I had to work, but I wanted to pick another career that I really enjoyed, and I love the outdoors. So living in Alaska just was, for me, that's my playground. And I found out that I had a knack for taking people out into the wilderness, climbing mountains, and ended up being a professional guide for over 25 years in Alaska. So that's kind of my background story. I like you said, I ended up teaching at the Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, taught there for about 16 years in the Marriott School of Business, and recently retired. And that's kind of been a big part of, I think, the reason why I'm working with you guys right now on this podcast is a couple of my associates and I realized that we had some expertise in some areas where people could probably use some of that expertise in consulting. And we're all professional guides, interesting enough. And we found that it was a real blend to be able to consult with business leaders, families, individuals, by, instead of teaching like we had been very used to in a classroom setting, is to take people out into different environments, whether it's the wilderness or in a city where we're touring the city or whatever it is, so that they actually have an experience as we're teaching the content material. And that's kind of, that idea is what led to forming a consulting group that we now call Beta Experiences.
And how long have you been at it? How long has Beta Experience been around?
I believe we started around 2008, just kind of because we had a potential client come to us and said, hey, we kind of want to know. And they basically came to the Marriott School of Business seeking some expertise. And we were introduced to them. And I think what really kind of, and my partner and I, Dr. Mark Widmer, we just kind of had this idea of trying to, teach people in an outdoor setting. That was the original idea. And I think that's what was unique about what we offered to this particular company. And they came to us offering us a chance to help them with a pain point that they had, which for them, they were a pharmaceutical company that was a $33 billion pharmaceutical company, but their revenue was generated by just one drug. And they were the only drug on the market to take care of a particular illness. And they had obviously had a lot of successes with it, but the patent was ready to expire and they had to change. And they realized that there was some resistance to change, which is a natural kind of feeling. And they came to us asking us if we had any expertise in helping people understand that change could be a good thing. And we were working at the time with another business professor by the name of Hal Gregerson, who's now out at MIT. He had written a book called It Starts With One, which was about strategic change. And working with him, we designed an experience down in Moab, Utah, where we used mountain biking as the medium to try to help the executives of this pharmaceutical company understanding that change can actually be a good thing. In fact, in some cases, it's necessary to change. And so that's how we started. That's how it started back probably around 2008, 2009.
And your typical clients, are they large enterprises or everything from small to large? What would you say a typical client would be?
I think we've really run the gamut of the entire spectrum. We currently work with a couple of companies that they're all nationally recognized in their specific fields, but some are international. I mean, we've worked with companies like Intel and Hyundai out of Korea. And we've worked with this particular pharmaceutical company. We've worked with some business fraternal organizations like the American College of Cardiology and companies like that. But then some of them are local. And so we offer that. But we're kind of a company that actually we have several different silos that we work with. And one of them is executive leadership consulting. We also do what we call family legacy planning, helping families that typically high net worth families kind of build their legacy. And we help them do things like build family businesses and offices and family banks, and then try to create this attitude of stewardship instead of inheritors of wealth from generation. We basically call it multi-generational wealth. Mm-hmm. And so we do things like that. We do educational types of things like one of our gateways to our company is a presentation that I've been giving now for about the last 2 years around choosing to thrive, helping individuals take a look at their life and realize that, you can either endure life or endure your business or endure your family, or you can work with us and we'll help you with certain types of tools to develop more of a thriving kind of environment. Mm-hmm. And that's part of our educational workshops and presentations that we do. And we've actually started helping retired people. Since I just recently retired, one of the things that we recognize is making that shift from a busy business life or academic life or whatever your career has been, and then now retired. We've discovered, like, for example, the CEO of a big company, when he or she retires and comes back home, they're not the CEO of the new environment anymore. It's usually the significant other that's right. The CEO. And that takes a little bit of a transition. So we're trying to help people make that transition as well.
And you kind of teed up my next question there. You mentioned the seeds of the company were kind of planted in 2008. You're kind of ramping up now. It seems like you're in recent times. And one way in which you've kind of built kind of a reputation among those that know you is your speeches and your talks around kind of choosing to thrive and kind of your 100 list. Could you speak to that for those that aren't familiar and kind of what that was and how that came to be and how that potentially informs kind of your work at Beta Experience?
Yeah, well, when you're growing up on a tropical island like Molokai, and it's a very rural, agricultural based island, I, for me, it was like surfing every day, going to school, probably end up working on a plantation for the rest of my life. But our family subscribed to a magazine, a pictorial magazine that some of your audience may be familiar with, called Life Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And that came every week, and I enjoyed looking through it. And in one particular issue, in the back inside cover is the kind of the picture of the week. And there was one that was intriguing because it was a gentleman holding up a piece of paper, and you could see things were written on the paper. And I believe the caption underneath was, "He has finished his list." And as I read, what this was all about, it was just about this guy when he was younger, just decided, there's things I want to do in this life. And so he started making this list. And it became kind of, I think, like a roadmap for him. And I was very intrigued with that idea. So I started kind of making that list. And over a period of about 10 years, I came up with 100 things that I just felt like, these are things I'd like to do. I'd like to accomplish. I'd like to learn. I'd like to visit people I'd like to meet. And I, I wasn't taking it very seriously. But when I was a guide, I had an incident where I had a client who was really struggling. We were climbing Denali, which, for those of you that don't know, is the highest mountain in North America, stands over 20,000 feet. And I was a guide almost on a yearly basis, taking people up this mountain. And he struggled, but eventually he would summit the mountain, which I was totally surprised because of his performance leading up to the summit day. He was just struggling every single day. But he was excited, of course, and then a year later, I get a phone call from his family, basically telling me that he had passed away. But they wanted me to know because he had actually come to climb. Well, he had come to see the mountain, but he climbed it because it had been one of his lifelong dreams to climb this mountain. But a month before he came on the expedition, he was diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And it was such devastating news to him that he literally gave up on life. He just didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to go see the doctors. He didn't want to work at his job. He was an attorney. He was engaged to be married, and ended up breaking off the engagement because he told his fiancee, there's no future with me. But his family encouraged him, well, at least go to Alaska and see the mountain. You don't have to climb it, just go see it, which he did. And then obviously he ends up climbing it. And of course, in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, well, that explains a lot of why he was kind of the weak link in the chain. And it just amazed me that he even did what he did. And his brother would later tell me that, when he came back from the expedition, he was just excited about life. He felt like he could conquer the disease. He got engaged with everything that he had dropped before, told the doctors, let's beat this thing. And he got re-engaged to his fiancee. And unfortunately, he lived for another year and he did die. But what had happened was his brother said, well, I don't know what happened on that mountain, but whatever it was, you gave us our brother back, because he was the same that he was before the diagnosis. In fact, his widow was 6 months pregnant, and they were so excited to have her part of the family, and that there was going to be this, I believe it was a daughter that would be a part of the family that was a legacy of their brother and son. And I'm sitting there basically crying because I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I was there and I have no idea what had happened. So at that point, I had decided I'm going to find out. I'm going to find out what makes what I call today a meaningful, transformational experience, because that's what happened on Denali. And that's been kind of my life's work that has given me more insights into this list that I've created that has literally been my roadmap to living a life to thrive rather than living a life just to endure. And of course, in the times that we've had over these past couple of years, I just hear all these stories of people who have just been enduring the pandemic, enduring the results of the pandemic. And a lot of people have lost hope. Some people have just said, I give up, just like my client did. So my hope is that this choose to thrive that I'm trying to teach people is hopefully an avenue to give them some hope again. Because what I teach is not complex. It's not rocket science. It's stuff that people can immediately get involved with and do it. They don't have to take classes. They don't have to, do anything spectacular. They're just creating a list, but there's a pathway to do it. It's not just creating a list, which is what I would refer to as that's creating a bucket list. Mm-hmm. We're not creating a bucket list. In fact, I tell people, don't call this a bucket list. This is a list to thrive. This is a list to actually live your life to its fullest. And we use Choose to Thrive as kind of our gateway to our company's offerings, all the other things that I've already mentioned, because we are finding out that the message resonates with people, and people are kind of interested in learning more, and we offer more, but we just want people to get on board to start taking control of their future.
You mentioned, it's not a bucket list. And I know in having conversations with you in the past that all of your experiences are kind of backed by, academic benchmarks and some psychology there. How do you square, talk me through that kind of, how that is backed up and benchmarked with that kind of psychological academic perspective that differentiates it from a bucket list or a vacation?
So my years at Brigham Young University, my research was around what I would call meaningful and transformational experiences. And what I've learned is that there are components of these kinds of experiences that obviously people can serendipitously do them, but you're not always going to have the same outcome. If you want to have some assurity that the outcome is going to be meaningful, which for me means that it's enlightening to you. It tells you something about yourself. Or transformational, which basically means behavioral changes will occur. You have to make sure that there's certain components that are a part of it. And one of the things that I realized over time is that a list to thrive, and the numbers there's nothing magical about the numbers. My list ended up being 100. I tell people, and I borrow this from actually Hal Gregerson's book, I tell people your list starts with one thing. If you don't do anything else, at least start with that one thing. But it has to be based on what I call your core values. You have to know really what matters to you most. And it's interesting that some people, they will have some sense of what they value, but a lot of times it's a value that somebody else told them they should have, like parents, maybe a boss, someone they respect. And there's a lot of people out there that really haven't taken the time to identify what matters to them most. And I tell people, if you haven't done that, then you're just like a ship in a stormy sea without a rudder. You have no control of the direction that you're going to go in, and you will be basically taken by the whims of the currents and the winds of the time, and I find that happening sometimes in business. Your audience may be familiar with a Dr. Clayton Christensen out of Harvard, who
absolutely
passed away. He wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And I would highly recommend that to your audience. But he points out that a lot of the people that he has worked with, went to school with, and actually became fairly successful in business have had a pretty miserable personal life because they never took the time to base their career on the things that matter to them most, their core values. So that's one thing that I found through my research that you really need to do to be able to create a list that's going to be meaningful and in many cases transformational, which in my mind creates a life to thrive.
Keep up to date on the latest news in economic development with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission's Arkansas Inc. newsletter. Each month, get the Arkansas Inc. newsletter, which spotlights the latest project wins and developments throughout the state, delivered to your email. The newsletter features major project announcements, company expansions and relocations, news articles, rankings, and more that highlight why Arkansas is a great state to do business. The newsletter is a snapshot of what AEDC has been working on and what we are following. The quarterly Tech Trends newsletter highlights the latest news in Arkansas's growing tech sector. You can learn about new Arkansas tech companies, computer science and cybersecurity initiatives, funding and venture capital announcements, and even more. AEDC offers 4 quarterly newsletters: the Food and Beverage Industry Digest, Aerospace and Defense Beacon, Timber Trends, and Tech Trends. To learn more or sign up for a newsletter, visit arkansasedc.com/news.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, what you say resonates so much with observations I've had over a long career, and even some of what we've done here, and some of the things we talk about on core values for our business and for others. But there's a pretty famous retelling of a story of when Troy Aikman won the second Super Bowl, and he made comments shortly thereafter to the effect of, "Is this all there is?" Because he had achieved all of these fantastic things that by any measure would be viewed as success, but I don't think he had a connection with the significance. It wasn't significant. It wasn't meaningful in some ways. That he was targeting a sort of a plateau or a landing spot without really understanding why it mattered.
Yeah.
Or we should care about it, or what was going to be significant about it beyond achieving that, that goal. And that, it's interesting. I'd be interested in your thoughts on we talk a lot about the destination is the journey, and you better enjoy the path and the journey that you're on. Elaborate a little bit more of that when you think about choosing to thrive and the list and all that. How important is enjoying the journey? And it will be winding, even if you have good targets of what you want to do.
It's interesting, Jeff, that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I've learned as I've been giving these presentations, so the presentation primarily just gives you the tools.
Sure.
It's one thing to say you shouldn't find out what your values are. Well, okay, so how do I do that? What do I think about? And I offer some tools, very simple tools. They're really metaphors, really. And it seems to help people kind of get a vision of what is it that they value. But one of the things that I've actually learned from one of my clients was a woman came up to me and she said, "Stacy, I've created my lists. I've got at least a good start on it. And it's based on my values." And that's what I tell people. The things you put on the list cannot be in conflict with what you've identified as your value. But she said, until I started actually doing things on the list, did I understand what you mean by thriving in life. In other words, it is the journey, it's the experience that really counts. Creating the list, thinking about these things kind of makes sense, and it helps you get started. But I tell people, all I've done is brought you to the base camp of the mountain of life that we're going to try to climb. And so one of the things that we offer in our company is we offer experiences. In fact, I'm leaving here in about 2 weeks, taking a group of people to Alaska. And we're going to do a bunch of different activities in Alaska, all of which are specifically designed to create at least meaningful experiences for them to understand and feel what thrive is like. And then from there, I think what it does is it all of a sudden becomes like, wow, that felt so good. And I've learned some things about myself that I didn't know before, which is what makes it meaningful, that I want more of it. I want to be able to do more things like that's on my list. And we try to teach people on these trips, then make sure that you have these components in your experience as you design it so that you have more opportunities to get that. But it is the journey. It is just having those experiences.
It sounds like that it'd be a good exercise for someone that's thinking about starting a new venture to really be grounded in some of this, to answer that why question. Why am I doing this and why does it matter? Because oftentimes we find that people get into it maybe because of some romantic notion, or they think they're going to make a lot of money, which is typically not the case in the startup world. But they haven't answered that why question well. They don't really understand why what they're doing is important or why it should be meaningful to them. So I mean, it's fantastic work that you're doing. Really impressive.
Yeah, and going back to the Troy Aikman story, you know, one of the things that we find, and I have found in my research, in meaningful experiences, really what we're trying to discover and what the experience can do for you is help to understand what I call your sublime nature. And I think Troy Aikman probably never took the time to look at it that way. We spend so much of our life trying to layer ourselves with what I call societal expectations. We get degrees so that we can put letters after our name. We try to work our way up in a company so that we can have titles and more impressive titles. We do things in our family to try to impress them with accomplishments and things like that. And every time we put these layers on, it tends to hide what really is our core self. And Immanuel Kant calls it the sublime nature of things. It's the, you know, if you've ever been somewhere, he uses the analogy of being out in nature and you've seen something that just literally takes your breath away. It's so awe-inspiring. And then you go home and try to tell your friends and family members, you know, this thing was just so impressive. It was, and you try to describe it to them, and they're kind of knowing you're excited about it, but they don't get it. They don't understand what you're saying. And Immanuel Kant says that's because you're trying to describe the indescribable. The sublime nature of things cannot be described. They have to be experienced. And so I've taken that to another level where I've just said, okay, so how do we discover this sublime nature? And what I've discovered is, well, the first thing you have to do is you need to start peeling off some of these societal layers that you have spent most of your life trying to earn and put on. Mm-hmm. But unless you take it off, you don't get the sense of who you really are. What's your weaknesses? What are your strengths? And based off of that, if you're coached in the right way, what are your potentials? If you don't understand that inner sublime nature of yourself, which I would think Troy Aikman may not have done, I don't know, maybe he did, but based on the responses that he gave, he was so busy becoming the best quarterback in the NFL. He probably was wanting to make sure that he got the MVP award. You know, maybe he was interested in getting a higher salary. These are all the societal layers that he was putting around himself, which then hid the sublime nature or the importance of really, why are you here? Who are you really? And what can you contribute, you know, beyond just getting a Super Bowl ring or whatever it is? And that's stuff that we try to teach within both our consulting with business leaders, with family members, with individuals, so that they have more of this opportunity to get to see a part of themselves that many times most people don't see at all, and definitely probably don't see very often.
And if you could take us through some of those experiences that you curate through Beta Experience, like for example, when you go to Alaska, what's an example of one of those experiences and how that's curated to facilitate that experience?
So one of the things that we're going to take the clients on is we're going to go do some sea kayaking in the fjords in Alaska, where they get to see, you know, the tidal glaciers calving into the ocean and see sea life that's, you know, swimming in the fjords and things like that. And so, you know, one of the things that we do, and we've really incorporated a lot in our work, is what we call mindfulness, the moment, where you are, and appreciating what's around you, and taking in basically the sublime nature of the environment that we are, so that they begin to recognize, oh, I get it. I know what the sublime nature means now. And then the thing that I think we're pretty good at is to help them make the transition so that they can see the sublime nature of themselves, which means they've got to know how to start peeling off some of the layers. So like one of the things that you do is you try to get them to go see a glacier where pieces are falling off and those kinds of things. And all of a sudden you're in this very awe-inspiring environment. But every once in a while, a big chunk will come off and it will splash in the water and literally create a tidal wave. And if you're in the right position and in the right place, obviously you want to keep it safe. You put these people into what I call a sublimation process. Sublimation, I know people think about it from probably their high school chemistry classes. That's when a solid turns into a gas and it skips the middle part. But in actuality, what it means, it's a purification process. And all of a sudden, when they see the tidal wave coming towards them, all of a sudden, you know what? It doesn't matter that I'm the CEO of my company anymore. It doesn't matter that I just won Employee of the Month last year, or it doesn't matter that I make this big amount of money. All of a sudden, it's me and this oncoming wave. Now, we keep them at a distance where the wave is impressive, but by the time it gets to us, it will end up just being a slight swell. But it's a huge wave and you can see it. And if you're not familiar with this area, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it might be a survival situation. So what we've just done is shown them an experience of sublimation. And what they have to come to grips with is, do I have the wherewithal to survive this? Can I paddle fast enough to outrun the wave? If I tip over, can I survive the cold water of Alaska? All of a sudden, it really comes down to who are you? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And sometimes finding out what your weaknesses are kind of hard to come to grips with. But one of the things that we try to do is we try to work together as a group because, it's really important for them to understand no man is an island by himself, right? It's the community that you're surrounded with. And in Hawaii, we use the word ohana, which literally translate means family, but it really means the community. It's the people that are around you, your support system. And that's what helps us to kind of get a better idea of what is our sublime nature. But that's how we use the environment to help teach a lesson. That's just one of the ways. And we make sure that that experience has the components that bring about the things that we're trying to get as an outcome. So a lot of the things that we do, and we pride ourselves, mainly because we all come from academic backgrounds, is all of our stuff is evidence-based. They're not just kind of a whim. It's not just anecdotal. It's because we know research backs up what we're talking about.
That's amazing. One of the ways we like to kind of land the plane after having these engaging conversations, and I'm really interested in your case, given what your journey has been like, is if you could take all this accumulated knowledge you have and the wisdom that you've developed and the experiences that you've had and go back to your younger self when you were at that beginning point, maybe when you were leaving Hawaii, maybe when you were first going to Alaska, or maybe at the beginning of the venture you're running, what advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in a time machine and talk to your earlier self?
Well, definitely make sure you know what matters to you most, because that, I think, is the foundation to everything that everybody, all of us really, we better know what kind of foundation we stand on. Because as I think all of you and your audience knows, the time to make choices is not in the heat of the moment. You better already know that my answer to this situation is going to be based on my belief or my philosophy or my core value that integrity matters. And so I'm going to make the best decision based on what I know to be my core value. There's a great story of a guy named Herman Krannert. I don't know if anybody knows him, but he was a mid-level manager in the Midwest, worked for a fiberboard manufacturing company. And he was given the opportunity for a big promotion, raise in salary, but there were some conditions that came along with this, and the conditions really tested his integrity. And he chose integrity over financial wealth and security. And you would think, wow, how could he give that up? Well, it ends up, you find out later that he ends up building a fiberboard manufacturing company that became even bigger than the one that he built, because he built it on his integrity. In fact, some of the executives from the old company he worked for heard what he had done, and they came to work for him. And his life became kind of a model of how not only did he know what his core values were, but he had prioritized them. Because you can just imagine that if your boss comes up to you and offers you, I'm going to triple your salary, I'm going to make you the senior vice president, I'm going to da 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 da, and you're thinking like, wow, that fits my value of financial security. But then he has or she has a stipulation that tests your integrity. Well, I don't think you want to be making that decision without knowing going into that situation before that my integrity is more important than financial security. You know, how I get the wealth is more important than getting the wealth. And Herman Krannert was actually honored by Purdue University. Their business school is named after Herman Krannert, a mid-level manager from the Midwest who believed in his core values and also prioritized them. He knew which ones were more important than others. That's what I would tell myself, is make sure you know what your foundational core values are and take the time to prioritize them so that you know, even when challenges come at you, this is what I'm going to stand for, rather than thinking, wow, you know, that sounds really good, because it would be just probably temporary.
That's fantastic. Caleb?
Well, Stacy, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And for our listeners that are interested, they want to learn more about you, they want to learn more about Beta Experiences, where should they go to learn more, to connect with you and the folks at Beta?
Well, just so your audience knows, our partners, we're all academics. We came from an academic background. And we really started Beta Experiences kind of as a thing that we just enjoyed working with each other and trying to find a way to share what we learned in our research with the public. You know, one of the problems with being an academic is we tend to publish in these very, esoteric journals that nobody's even heard of. We wanted to be able to share it with a lot of other people. So what we did was we created kind of this part-time side job called Beta Experiences. And our website is beta, BETAEXP.com, one word, all subcase letters. Because I retired, and we've been getting some very positive responses from our previous clients, that's telling us, you guys got something here. You need to build it out. My partners have said, well, Stacy, you're retired. Why don't you go ahead and full-time try to make this happen? And so we're trying to do it. We'll see how it goes, but primarily, if you want to know who we are and what we do, come visit us at betaexp.com. And then of course, they can reach out to me. It's just Stacy, STACY at betaexp.com. You send me an email, I'd be happy to correspond with any of your audience members.
Thanks so much for coming on. Great conversation. Sometime or another over cold beers or some other kind of adult beverage, I'd like to hear more about the guiding stories and whatnot. I hope our paths cross, because this was really a great conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you. Maybe what I need to do is have you guys come join us on one of our adventures.
I think that's a good idea.
That would not be a hard sell. I'm ready to go right now, I think.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks for coming,
Stacy. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Ecosystem builders, entrepreneurs, chambers of commerce, mayors, If you're interested in taking your economic future into your own hands, we've got a book that can help you. Creating Startup Junkies, Building Sustainable Venture Ecosystems in Unexpected Places is the guide. It's a little bit inspiration. It's a little bit toolkit. What it will allow you to do is take your economic future into your own hands and build a sustainable small business, innovation, and entrepreneurial ecosystem in your backyard. If you'd like to hear more, check out creatingstartupjunkies.com. The Startup Junkie podcast reaches over 100 countries and has had over 100,000 downloads. If you're interested in reaching some of the most motivated and engaged innovators and entrepreneurs on a worldwide basis, give us a shout.